morning sun spilled across the quiet town, casting a golden hue over the streets as the city slowly stirred to life. Birds chirped from the telephone wires, car engines hummed in the distance, and the comforting clatter of dishes echoed from the corner diner on Maple Avenue. Inside, the place was buzzing with the familiar rhythm of a breakfast rush. The warm aroma of sizzling bacon, brewed coffee, and fresh pancakes mingled in the air. The diner had its own heartbeat, steady, confident, and familiar. Plates slid onto countertops. Servers darted between tables, balancing trays and taking orders. Among them was Harper. Harper was more than just a waitress. She was a staple of the diner itself. In her mid-20s, with a ponytail that swayed as she moved and eyes that sparkled with empathy, she radiated warmth. Regulars often joked that her smile came complimentary with every cup of coffee. She moved with practiced ease, refilling mugs, remembering orders without writing them down, asking about Mrs. Langley's arthritis, or if Mr. Turner had won his weekly poker night. For Harper, this wasn't just a job. It was a place where she could make people's days a little better, one plate at a time. "Morning, Harper," called out Gus, one of the line cooks, from behind the hot plate. "Morning, Gus. Got that veggie omelet for booth 4? He slid the plate toward her without looking up. "Hot and ready, and I threw in some extra toast. That guy looked like he skipped dinner last night." Harper grinned. "You're the best." She grabbed the plate, added silverware to the tray, and balanced it effortlessly as she weaved through the maze of tables. She paused for a moment at a booth with an elderly couple, checking on them with a gentle tone and a kind nod. Small talk, smiles, gratitude. She thrived in it. But as she neared the front of the diner, something outside the large pane window pulled her attention. At first, she thought it was a shadow, maybe someone walking by. But as she turned to glance again, her steps slowed. There, at the edge of the sidewalk near the curb, sat a small golden retriever puppy. Alone. He wasn't moving much. His light coat was matted and streaked with mud, and his ribs pressed through his thin fur like silent cries for help. He sat quietly, ears drooping, his wide brown eyes scanning the window. He wasn't barking, whining, or pacing. He just waited. Harper's feet stopped moving. The tray in her hand trembled slightly. The pup's eyes locked with hers. For a moment, the world inside the diner seemed to fade. The background noise dulled. The sounds became distant. All she could see was that dog, and in his eyes she saw desperation, hunger, hope. He sniffed the air when a passing customer carried out a takeout bag. His mouth didn't open. He didn't beg. But his gaze lingered on the scent, as if dreaming of even a scrap falling from the heavens. Harper's throat tightened. She blinked, shaking herself back to reality, and continued on her way, setting the tray down at the designated booth. "Here you go. 1 veggie omelet, extra toast," she said with cheer, though her voice faltered slightly. The customer smiled his thanks, but Harper was already glancing back toward the window. She couldn't focus. She passed the counter again and craned her neck for another glimpse of the pup. He hadn't moved, still watching, still waiting. She paused near the coffee machine, pretending to top up the pot while whispering to herself, "Someone must have left him. Or maybe he's lost." She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but deep down, she already knew. That dog wasn't just wandering. He'd been out there for a while, and no one had come for him. Harper set the pot down a little harder than she intended. "Everything all right?" asked Cheryl, another server. "Yeah, just distracted," Harper replied, biting her lip. She paced toward the kitchen entrance and caught sight of her manager, Mr. Connor, clipboard in hand, doing his usual walk-through. Sharp suit, sharper tone. He was all business. Still, Harper decided to try. "Hey, Mr. Connor," she called. He didn't stop walking. "Make it quick, Harper. I've got inventory to review." She caught up with him. "There's a dog outside. He's just sitting there. Looks like a stray. I was wondering if I could—" "No," he said immediately, not even sparing her a glance. I already know what you're going to ask. We're not feeding stray animals. You know the policy." "But he's starving," she said, a little louder than she meant to. Connor stopped, finally looking at her. "And you think giving him a plate of food fixes that? This is a restaurant, Harper, not a kennel. We throw out food all the time, just one plate. Not your decision," he said firmly. "You want to help strays? Do it on your time, not mine." He turned and walked away, ending the conversation without another word. Harper stood there, torn between frustration and helplessness. The puppy's face flashed in her mind again. Those eyes, that stillness, that hope. She turned back toward the counter, her jaw set, and then, without saying a word, she made a decision. A few minutes later, Harper emerged from the kitchen with a to-go box tucked under her arm. Inside were scrambled eggs, toast, and 2 slices of bacon left untouched by a customer. She'd wrapped it quickly, carefully, and added a small cup of water. She pushed the door open with her shoulder, stepping into the morning light. The puppy was still there. As she approached, he flinched slightly but didn't run. His eyes met hers again. "Hey, little guy," Harper said softly, crouching to his level. "I brought you something." She opened the box slowly and placed it on the sidewalk in front of him. The pup sniffed the air, hesitated, and then took a cautious step forward. Another sniff. Then, with a sudden urgency, he began eating, fast, messy, desperate. Harper watched, her heart breaking with every bite. As he devoured the last bit of toast, she reached out and gently brushed her fingers along his head. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she whispered. Behind her, the diner door swung open.
The bell above the diner door jingled harshly behind her. "Harper," a voice snapped. She flinched and turned. Connor stood at the doorway, eyes narrowed, arms crossed over his chest like stone pillars of disapproval. "What do you think you're doing?" He barked loud enough to catch the attention of several customers inside. Harper stood slowly, brushing her hands off on her apron. You were just feeding a stray," he interrupted, stepping onto the pavement. "What did I just tell you?" "It was leftover food," Harper replied calmly, though her voice trembled. "No one was going to eat it." Connor took a few more steps toward her, lowering his voice but sharpening his tone. "We have rules, Harper. This isn't your personal charity." "He's starving," she said, nodding toward the pup, who now sat again with his tail wagging slowly, licking his lips from the meal. "That's not our problem," Connor snapped. "If he sticks around, customers will stop coming. You want that? You want stray dogs parked at the front door of a food business?" Harper didn't answer. Her silence was her resistance. Connor's jaw clenched. "You're done here. You can collect your things and go." For a second, Harper couldn't process the words. "Wait, are you firing me?" "Yes, for disobeying a direct order, and for causing a scene. I run a business. You want to save dogs, go volunteer at a shelter." She stood there, stunned. The noise of the city returned like a rushing wave, the dishes clattering inside, the cars rolling past. A woman exiting the diner paused to look at her, eyes filled with awkward sympathy before she turned and walked away. Harper swallowed the lump forming in her throat and crouched again beside the puppy. She didn't want to cry. Not here. Not in front of her manager, or strangers, or even this little dog whose only crime was being hungry and hopeful. "It's okay, buddy," she murmured, scratching behind his ear. "It's not your fault." The puppy leaned into her touch, letting out a soft, content breath, like he'd been waiting all day just to be seen, just to matter. Her fingers ran through the knots in his coat, and she whispered again, "You're not alone anymore." But as warm as the moment felt, her mind raced. She was out of a job, no paycheck, rent was due in 2 weeks, utilities, groceries. Her savings barely covered emergencies, and this felt like a reckless decision even though every part of her believed it was right. She sat there for a moment longer, blocking out the world. It was just her and the pup, who had now settled beside her like he'd found the one safe place in the world. And maybe, in that moment, he had. The seconds passed slowly. Harper knew she couldn't sit on the pavement forever. She'd have to go back in and collect her things, face the stares, the whispers. She stood up, brushing off her apron one last time, and gave the pup a small nod. "Wait here, okay?" But before she turned, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. Harper's eyes narrowed slightly. The vehicle's windows were tinted, and its engine hummed smoothly. The driver's door opened, and a tall man in a tailored suit stepped out. Clean lines, polished shoes. He didn't look like someone who would normally stop on a city sidewalk in front of a diner. He looked at her, then down at the puppy, his expression unreadable. "Excuse me," he said, approaching with a calm but firm voice. "Did you feed this dog?" Harper glanced down at the pup, who had perked up again, his tail wagging faintly. "Yes," she said slowly. "Is that a problem?" The man shook his head and crouched down, extending a hand toward the golden retriever. "No problem at all," he said gently. "In fact, you may have just saved him." Harper blinked. "What do you mean?" The dog sniffed the man's hand cautiously and then nudged it with his nose. "I've been looking for this Lee. I've been looking for this little guy for days," the man said, his voice softer now. "His name is Scout. He belongs to someone very important to me." Harper's eyes widened. "Wait, he's yours?" "Not mine," the man said with a faint smile. "My daughter's. He ran off during a thunderstorm and we haven't seen him since. She's been devastated." The golden retriever stared up at the man and then slowly pressed his head into the man's chest. It was clear now, Scout knew him. And maybe, deep down, he'd been waiting for this moment too. I didn't know," Harper said, still trying to process the turn of events. "He was just sitting out here, starving. I couldn't just ignore him, and I'm thankful you didn't." The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. From it, he retrieved a glossy business card and handed it to her. "I'm Andrew Dawson," he said. "I run the Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation. You may have heard of us." Harper took the card, eyes scanning the sleek lettering and emblem. She had heard of it, on the news, in local articles. It was one of the most well-known animal welfare organizations in the city. "I don't know what to say," Harper murmured. "You don't need to say anything," Andrew replied. "Just show up, tomorrow morning. I'd like to offer you something in return for what you did today." Scout climbed into the back seat of the SUV with a little help, curling up on the leather like he finally felt safe again. As Andrew closed the door, the retriever turned his head and locked eyes with Harper one last time. A single, grateful bark escaped him. Harper smiled, waving. "Take care, buddy." As the SUV pulled away, Harper stood there holding the business card, heart pounding. Fired moments ago, unsure of her future, and now, handed an opportunity she hadn't even dared to dream of. She didn't know where this would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like something good was waiting just around the corner. The street outside the diner had never felt so still. Harper remained rooted to the spot, fingers clutching the sleek business card like it was both a lifeline and a mystery. Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation. She ran her thumb over the embossed text again, trying to believe what had just happened was real. Only minutes earlier, she'd been scolded and fired, publicly, for feeding a stray. Now, she had just met someone connected to one of the most prominent animal foundations in the city, and that stray turned out to be someone's beloved pet. Someone had noticed her act of compassion, but the warmth from that moment didn't last long. The realization came creeping back in like a cold draft. She still didn't have a job. Her apron still clung to her waist, and her locker still had her name taped on the front. She inhaled deeply, squared her shoulders, and walked back into the diner. The atmosphere had shifted. Conversations quieted as she passed. A few customers avoided her eyes. Others gave her pitying glances. She walked with her head high anyway. Connor stood by the kitchen, arms folded, waiting. "I see you're back," he said without a hint of remorse. "I came to get my things," she replied simply. He stepped aside. "Make it quick." In the back room, Harper opened her locker slowly. The familiar scent of cooking oil, grease, and coffee grounds seemed to cling to the metal. She pulled out a small tote bag, stuffing in her notepad, a change of shoes, and a sweater she kept for the colder shifts. With one last look at the faded photo taped inside, her and her younger brother laughing in a photo booth, she shut the locker for good. As she stepped out, Connor was still there, waiting. "I hope you understand why this had to happen," he said in a tone that tried to sound reasonable. "It's business, Harper. You broke the rules." Harper turned to face him fully. "You're right," she said. "I did break the rules." His eyebrows lifted slightly, surprised at her agreement. "But May," she continued, "some rules are worth breaking." With that, she walked past him and didn't look back. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows on the pavement. Harper paused for a moment, staring up at the sky. Her heart was still pounding. There were 100 things to be afraid of right now: rent, food, bills. But somehow, she didn't feel afraid. Scout's eyes still lingered in her memory. So did Andrew's words, "You may have just saved him." As she walked home, the streets buzzed with life, people rushing past, carrying coffees, checking phones. No one knew that Harper's world had shifted entirely in a single morning. Back at her apartment, Harper sank into the couch, staring at the card again. It felt too surreal, too sudden. But a part of her, the same part that stepped outside to feed a hungry dog, knew this wasn't a coincidence. She glanced at the clock. The shelter's address wasn't far. She'd go, tomorrow morning, no matter what. That night was restless. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while the thought spiraled. What if it was a courtesy meeting? What if there wasn't really an offer? What if she'd been reading too much into a kind gesture? But then she remembered the way Andrew had looked at her, like she mattered, like what she did mattered. That single act, born out of instinct, had set off a chain reaction she couldn't yet understand. She drifted into sleep just before dawn, Scout's grateful gaze lingering in the back of her mind. Morning came quickly. Harper dressed with unusual care. She pulled her hair back, chose a clean blouse, and stood in front of the mirror with a nervous flutter in her chest. "This is either the best decision I've ever made," she whispered, "or the start of a very weird chapter. Either way, she had to find out." The building came into view as she approached. Sleek, modern, and surrounded by clean landscaping, Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation looked like a place where change happened. Large windows let in natural light, and the logo over the entrance made her stomach flip. She hesitated on the sidewalk. What if she didn't belong here? Then, remembering Connor's dismissive tone, she inhaled and stepped forward. Because maybe she didn't belong there anymore. But here, this might be different. The reception area was bright and clean, with the scent of fresh pine and faint dog shampoo in the air. Photos of adopted animals lined the walls, before and after shots, names scribbled in handwriting beneath smiling pets. A receptionist greeted her. "Hi. Can I help you?" I'm Harper. I was invited by Harper." A familiar voice called from the hallway. Andrew Dawson strode toward her with a genuine smile. He looked different, less formal today, but still confident and collected. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I wasn't sure if it was a real offer," Harper admitted, her nerves cracking through her voice. Andrew's expression softened. "Harper, what you did yesterday, most people wouldn't have even looked twice at that dog. You stepped up. We need people like that here." She swallowed. "So, you're really offering me a job?" "I am," he nodded. "We'll start part-time. You'll assist with intake, feeding, light care duties. If things go well, there's room for more." Harper was stunned. A day ago, she was cleaning tables. Today, she was stepping into something that felt like purpose. "I'd love that," she said, her voice quiet but certain. Andrew smiled and gestured for her to follow him. "Come on, let me show you around. You're going to feel right at home." And as she walked through those halls for the first time, past rooms filled with hope, recovery, and second chances, Harper realized something powerful. Getting fired might have been the best thing that ever happened to her. The tour began with a quiet sense of awe. As Harper followed Andrew through the wide, sunlit hallways of the Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation, it felt like stepping into a world built entirely around hope. The walls were covered in snapshots, dogs, cats, even rabbits and birds, all smiling or nestled into the arms of their new families. Most of them had once been abandoned, unwanted, unseen, and now, they were home. "This is the intake wing," Andrew said, leading her into a softly lit corridor. "New arrivals stay here during quarantine. Medical checks, grooming, emotional evaluation, all the basics to stabilize them before they meet potential adopters." Harper paused by one of the glass-fronted rooms. Inside, a young Labrador mix lay curled in a bed, his eyes drooping with exhaustion. "He came in 2 nights ago," Andrew explained. "Found near a construction site. Cut up, terrified, but already improving." Harper's heart swelled. This place wasn't just a shelter, it was a sanctuary. They moved on to the medical wing, where a team of vets and assistants moved efficiently between animals on treatment tables. One of the techs was bottle feeding a litter of kittens in a blanket-lined basket. "And over here," Andrew said, stopping at a large set of windows, "is our outdoor play and exercise area. Sunshine, clean air, and room to stretch their legs." Dogs of all sizes chased toys and tumbled across the open yard. A few volunteers stood nearby, monitoring, laughing. Harper's eyes scanned the yard, and paused. A familiar figure was racing through the grass, his ears flapping and tail wagging wildly. "Scout?" she breathed. Andrew followed her gaze and grinned. "Yep, he's been here all morning. My daughter's visiting family for a few days, so we're giving him some extra playtime." Scout noticed her and froze mid-run. Then, like a bullet, he charged toward the fence, barking happily. Harper rushed outside and crouched just as he reached the edge. "Hey, boy," she laughed as his tongue smothered her face. "I missed you too." He leaned into her, tail wagging furiously. His joy was infectious. Andrew stood back, watching the reunion unfold. "He remembers you. That much is obvious." "I didn't expect to see him again," Harper said, wiping her cheek and grinning. "Well, you're part of his story now," Andrew replied. "And his story changed because of you." Harper stroked Scout's head gently, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. For a fleeting moment, everything felt right. But Andrew's tone shifted slightly as he added, "There's something else you should know." Harper looked up, curious. "What is it?" Andrew paused, glancing toward the shelter. "It's about your old manager, Mr. Grady." The name instantly soured the air. "I started digging after you told me what happened," Andrew continued. And I found something disturbing. There was a report filed against him a few months ago with animal control. Harper's brows furrowed. About what? Mistreatment of strays. Someone said he'd been chasing them away from the diner, aggressively, using brooms, loud shouting, maybe worse. Her stomach twisted. She had seen glimpses of that behavior, his disdain for animals, the way he reacted so quickly when she mentioned the dog. But she hadn't realized it ran deeper. Why didn't anything happen? She asked. No evidence, Andrew said with a shrug. No witnesses willing to testify. It was brushed aside. Until now. Harper swallowed. You think feeding Scout pushed him over the edge? Andrew nodded. He didn't want that dog around. And when you showed compassion, it made him look bad. That kind of ego doesn't take well to being chow. The wind shifted gently across the yard. Harper looked at Scout, now resting beside her, head tilted in quiet observation. I can't believe I got fired. For doing the right thing, she said, her voice low. You didn't just do the right thing, Andrew said. You changed someone's life. That matters. Harper stood up, brushing grass from her jeans. So what now? I've been working with animal control again, he said. But we'll need more than stories. We'll need proof. She looked at him carefully. And if I help you get it? Andrew met her gaze. Then we make sure no other animal gets hurt the way Scout nearly did. That evening, Harper returned home with a mix of determination and unease. She sat on her couch, staring at the quiet apartment. It was tidy, a little sparse, just enough to be called hers. Bills were still there. Her job was still gone. But she didn't feel defeated. She felt focused. She glanced at her phone and pulled up the contact saved earlier, Andrew Dawson. Then opened her text messages and typed, "Let me know how I can help. I want to stop him." The reply came quickly. "We'll talk tomorrow. Be safe tonight." Harper set the phone down and curled up on the couch, her mind racing. Grady hadn't just been heartless. He might have been harming animals right outside a family diner. And no one had stopped him. But now she had a reason. And this time, she wasn't alone. Scout's face, joyful and full of trust, drifted through her mind once again. That little act of kindness, the one that got her fired, was now the start of something much bigger. And Harper wasn't going to stop. The sun rose quietly the next morning, spilling light through Harper's window as if nudging her forward. She stood in front of her wardrobe longer than usual, trying to decide what to wear. There was no uniform anymore, no apron to tie around her waist. Today wasn't about pouring coffee or balancing plates. Today was about stepping into something new, something unknown. A clean pair of jeans, a soft blue shirt, and her favorite sneakers. That would do. By the time she reached the entrance of Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation, her nerves had begun to stir. The building looked just as it had the day before, modern, well-kept, inviting. Yet now it felt like more than a facility. It felt like a doorway. She stepped inside, greeted once again by the smiling receptionist. "Back already?" the woman said with a knowing look. Harper smiled. "I guess I couldn't stay away." Before she could say more, Andrew appeared from around the corner. "Harper, right on time." He extended a hand, but the gesture was more than professional. It felt welcoming. "You ready for your first day?" he asked as he led her down the main hallway. "As ready as I'll ever be," Harper replied, her nerves melting slightly under the warmth of his tone. "Great. We'll keep things simple to start. You'll shadow Natalie for the morning. She's one of our lead volunteers. She'll show you the ropes, feeding schedules, medication logs, daily care routines." As they turned a corner, a tall woman with curly hair and a clipboard greeted them. "You must be Harper," she said with a smile. "I've heard good things already." "That's surprising," Harper laughed. Natalie chuckled. "Word travels fast here. Come on, I'll give you the grand tour. Let's get your hands dirty." They started in the supply room. Natalie showed her where the leashes, shampoos, food, blankets, and medication were stored. "This place runs on routine," Natalie explained. "It keeps the animals calm. Structure is comforting." From there, they moved into the kennel area. Harper paused as they entered. The sound of dogs barking, whining, and snuffling filled the air. Some wagged their tails hopefully. Others curled into corners, too scared to approach the bars. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't quiet. But it was real. And it mattered. Natalie handed her a pair of gloves and a bucket. "Come on, let's clean out the morning runs and refill the bowls. I'll show you how we rotate them." Harper rolled up her sleeves without hesitation. She wasn't afraid of hard work. What she hadn't expected, though, was how natural it felt. Within an hour, she was moving with quiet confidence, scrubbing down kennels, refreshing water dishes, and gently coaxing the more timid dogs out of their corners with treats and kind words. She noticed one of the dogs, a small gray terrier, flinch every time someone walked by. His food sat untouched. "His name's Tucker," Natalie said softly. "He came in a week ago. Skittish as anything. Doesn't trust humans much." Harper crouched near the gate and rested her hand beside the bowl without making eye contact. "It's okay, Tucker," she whispered. "You don't have to come close. I'm just saying hi." He didn't move, but he didn't growl either. And after a few moments, he sniffed the air and edged toward the food. Harper smiled, heart fluttering. By lunchtime, Harper's shirt had smudges of fur and her hands smelled faintly of disinfectant and peanut butter treats, but she didn't mind. She hadn't even realized how much time had passed. Natalie gave her a nod of approval. "You've got a good touch." Harper wiped her hands on a towel. "I've always loved animals. I just never thought I'd end up somewhere like this." Natalie gestured toward the rows of kennels. "No one plans it. You just get pulled in. And then, suddenly, you can't imagine doing anything else." Later that afternoon, Harper sat in the break room with Andrew, going over intake forms. "You did well today," he said, sliding a folder across the table. Everyone noticed. Harper looked up from her form. "It didn't feel like work." Andrew smiled. "That's usually a sign you're in the right place." She hesitated. "Is it always this emotional?" Andrew leaned back, nodding slowly. "Yes, sometimes in good ways, sometimes not, but every good moment outweighs the hard ones." Harper closed the folder gently. "I want to do more, learn more, be more than just a temp volunteer." "You will," he replied. "Start with this part-time role. Get grounded. Once you're ready, we'll talk about expanding it." Before she left for the day, Harper took a detour through the outdoor play yard. Scout was there again, lying under a tree in the afternoon sun. He perked up as she approached and bounded over to greet her. "I'll never get tired of that face," she laughed as he nuzzled into her. As she scratched behind his ears, she felt something click inside, like a puzzle piece she hadn't known was missing suddenly falling into place. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't worried about tips, or rude customers, or being just another name on a staff list. Here, she mattered. Harper glanced back at the building, its windows reflecting the light like beacons. And somewhere inside, frightened animals were being fed, cared for, comforted. She stood there a little longer, hand resting on Scout's back, heart full and quiet. Tomorrow, she'd be back again. She was sure of it now. This wasn't just a temporary job. It was a new beginning. Harper's second week at Evergreen began just like the first. Early mornings, a fresh cup of tea, and the eager wag of tails echoing through the kennels. But this time, something felt different. It wasn't nerves. It wasn't the fear of doing something wrong or trying to prove she belonged. It was comfort. She walked into the shelter each day with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. She greeted the dogs by name, remembered each feeding routine, and moved through her responsibilities like she'd been doing it for years. The noise didn't overwhelm her anymore. The smell of disinfectant and dog food was just part of the air now. The anxious eyes behind the kennel doors. She knew what they needed: patience, consistency, and kindness, and they trusted her for it, especially Tucker. Every day, the little gray terrier had edged closer. Every day, he'd wag his tail just a little more. And then one morning, as Harper opened his gate with a treat in hand, he walked right up and placed his paw on her leg. Her heart nearly burst. "You're getting brave," she whispered, kneeling down to stroke his fur. That was the moment she knew, this wasn't just a job anymore. It was something deeper. Natalie noticed it, too. "You have a way with the nervous ones," she said one afternoon as they cleaned the play yard together. "They trust you faster than most." Harper shrugged modestly. "Maybe they just sense I'm as lost as they are." "No," Natalie replied with a smile. "They sense you see them. That's rarer than you think." Andrew had been giving Harper more responsibility as well, helping manage medication records, handling intake interviews with new volunteers, even introducing her to visiting veterinarians and community partners. He trusted her, and that trust lit a fire in her that she hadn't felt in a long time. One afternoon, Andrew invited her to sit in on a planning meeting. "We're organizing a small adoption event in 2 weeks, he said. "Nothing major, just a few tents, some flyers, and hopefully a few forever homes. Want in?" Harper nodded without hesitation. "Definitely." He handed her a clipboard. "You'll help coordinate the volunteers, handle the animal roster, and oversee the booth setup. Think of it as your first big project." She took the clipboard, smiling. "I won't let you down." "I know." That evening, Harper stayed late to help clean out the medical wing. As she wiped down the counters and stacked clean blankets on the shelf, she noticed a quiet moment happening across the room. One of the older dogs, a black lab with cloudy eyes named Mocha, was being comforted by a young volunteer. The dog leaned into the boy's lap, breathing slowly, finally calm. Harper paused to take it in. There was something sacred about this place, about giving creatures a second chance, a place to feel safe, a moment to be seen. She remembered how she used to feel after diner shifts, drained, invisible, replaceable. Here, she felt alive, not just because of what she was doing, but because it was needed, because it mattered. A few days later, Andrew pulled Harper aside during lunch. "You've been doing incredible work," he said. "How would you feel about making this permanent?" Harper blinked. "You mean, full-time?" "If you want it," he said. "You've already proven you're more than capable, and the team loves working with you." She didn't need time to think. "Yes," she said with a grin. 100 times, yes. Andrew smiled. "Welcome to the family, then." The next morning, Harper filled out her official paperwork. A new badge, a new title, a new chapter. And on that same day, something else changed. Tucker, who had been slowly growing more comfortable, jumped into her lap without hesitation. Harper laughed and held him close. "You know what, Tucker? I think this is where we both belong." She glanced around the room, the barking dogs, the sound of a hose in the distance, the soft voices of volunteers speaking gently to frightened animals. This place, this sanctuary, was noisy, messy, emotional, exhausting. But for the first time in her adult life, she didn't dread waking up. She didn't wonder what she was doing with her life. She knew. Her purpose wasn't to serve coffee or rush between tables with a forced smile. It was to kneel beside a frightened animal, offer her hand, and say, "You're safe now." It was to rebuild trust, one tail wag at a time. And as she walked through the shelter, clipboard in hand and Tucker trotting beside her, she realized something powerful. Maybe she hadn't rescued these animals after all. Maybe they'd rescued her. 2 weeks had passed since Harper officially became a full-time member of Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation. The pace was quicker, the responsibilities heavier, but she felt more anchored than ever. Days started early and ended late, but in between were moments of impact. Puppies being adopted, timid dogs learning to trust, animals healing because people refused to give up on them. But beneath all the good, something darker was beginning to stir. It started with a simple file. Harper had been helping organize intake records from the past 6 months. She was sorting through handwritten notes and digital entries when she noticed a familiar address on one of the forms, near the diner where she used to work. The forms, near the diner where she used to work. The dog listed was a beagle mix named Max, found behind a dumpster, underweight, tail between his legs. The vet's notes mentioned signs of physical trauma, bruises, cuts, and extreme fear of loud voices. Harper stared at the location again. It wasn't just near the diner. It was behind it. Her stomach tightened. She set the file aside but couldn't ignore the pit forming in her chest. Later that afternoon, she approached Andrew in his office. "I found something," she said, placing the folder in front of him. He glanced over the paperwork, brows furrowing as he scanned the address. "This is Grady's place," Harper said. Andrew leaned back in his chair. "That's not the first animal we've picked up around there." He opened a drawer and pulled out a separate folder, one labeled Suspicious Cases, Incomplete Reports. Inside were 3 other incidents, all near or behind the same diner. Each dog had similar injuries, similar fear responses, and the next day, Harper began her own quiet investigation. She walked past the diner after her shift, lingering across the street, watching the back alley through a gap in the fencing. The same rusty dumpster sat in the corner, a broken-down bench, stains on the concrete, but no animals. Not that day. Over the next week, she passed by the diner several times, always at different hours. Morning, afternoon, night. She saw nothing unusual. No dogs. No suspicious activity. Until the 6th day. It was nearly dusk. The streetlights had just flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. Harper stood across the street with Tucker by her side, pretending to scroll her phone. That's when she saw him. Grady stepped out the back door, a broom in his hand. He looked around, then raised his voice. "Get lost." Harper's eyes darted to the side of the dumpster, just enough movement to make out a thin, orange-striped cat scrambling out from behind it. Grady swung the broom hard against the wall, shouting again. The cat bolted into the alley and disappeared. Harper pulled out her phone and started recording. It wasn't much. No direct hit. No blood. But it was enough to show aggression. Enough to prove intent. Back at the shelter, she uploaded the footage to the shared drive and called Andrew into the office. He watched in silence, jaw tight. "It's not enough to press charges," he said, "but it's a start. If we can document more, we can build a case." Harper nodded. "Then let's start building." The following days became a rhythm of care and quiet surveillance. Harper worked her shifts as usual, feeding, cleaning, comforting, but each evening, she spent an hour monitoring the diner from a distance. Sometimes she was alone. Other times, Tucker came with her. His presence made her feel a little braver. Twice, she spotted Grady throwing water at a dog that lingered too close to the alley. Once, he hurled a metal tray onto the pavement just to scare off a wandering mutt. Each time, Harper filmed it. Each time, the evidence grew. Meanwhile, Evergreen continued rescuing strays from that same part of town. Thin, injured, scared. It wasn't random anymore. It was a pattern, and Harper was connecting the dots. One night, after finishing the intake paperwork for a newly arrived pup found not far from the diner, Harper stayed late and walked into Andrew's office. "We need to go public," she said. Andrew looked up from his laptop. "It's close," he agreed. "But not yet." Harper frowned. "What are we waiting for?" "For something we can't ignore," he replied. "Something no one can deny." Harper sighed and dropped into the chair across from him. "You're right. I hate that he's still out there." Andrew studied her for a moment. "You know, most people wouldn't push this far." "I'm not most people," she said. He smiled. "No, you're not." Harper left that night with a heavier heart than usual. The dogs at the shelter were safe. But out there, behind that diner, the problem still festered. and she wasn't going to stop until it was brought to light. She passed the sleeping kennels, pausing at Tucker's. He lifted his head, tail thumping softly. "Not tonight, boy," she whispered. But soon, because Harper had seen enough darkness to know what silence protected, and she wasn't about to stay silent anymore. The next morning, Harper arrived at Evergreen earlier than usual. The air was crisp, the shelter still quiet. She stood at the gate for a moment, breathing in the silence before unlocking it. Inside, the kennels were calm. Most of the dogs were still curled in their beds, the occasional tail thump greeting her like a quiet morning ritual. Tucker perked up as she passed, letting out a soft bark. His presence had become her anchor. But today, Harper wasn't just there to care for the animals. Today, she was going to speak up. She entered the office and sat at her desk, eyes fixed on the folder she'd been building for over a week. Inside were video clips, photographs, vet records, and notes, everything she and Andrew had quietly gathered. Each document told the same story. Strays in one specific area were being mistreated, driven off, and sometimes injured. And all signs pointed back to one man, Grady. Harper stared at the folder for a long moment. This wasn't just about right and wrong anymore. This was personal. The dog that cost her her job had led her here, into a life filled with meaning. She couldn't let the man who nearly ruined that county. By the end of the week, Animal Control had issued a public statement saying they were reopening their investigation into the diner and Grady's conduct. The shelter was flooded with volunteers and visitors. Some came to donate. Some came to ask about adopting. Others came just to say thank you. But through it all, Harper stayed grounded. She spent her days cleaning kennels, checking medical logs, and sitting with nervous dogs like Tucker. She didn't want the attention. She didn't need praise. She just wanted the hurting to stop. One afternoon, as she sat outside with Tucker, Andrew came and sat beside her. "You've started something bigger than you think," he said. "I just wanted to do what was right. And you did. But now comes the harder part." "What's that?" "Seeing it through." Harper looked down at Tucker, who rested his head on her lap, tail thumping gently. "I will," she said, "no matter what." Because she hadn't come this far to stay quiet. Not anymore. The following days felt like walking a tightrope. On one side, Harper was being praised as a voice for the voiceless. Messages poured in through Evergreen's inbox, people applauding her courage, asking how they could help, even sharing similar stories of animal mistreatment in their neighborhoods. On the other side, there was silence, the kind of silence that felt too quiet. No word from Grady, no public statement, no rebuttal. Harper knew that silence wasn't surrender. It was the sound of someone plotting their next move. And sure enough, the retaliation came. It started with a shattered window. Harper arrived early one morning to find broken glass glittering across the reception floor. One of the front windows had been smashed with a brick sometime during the night. The brick sat on the ground with a note tied to it in red tape. "Stay out of what doesn't concern you." She froze, her breath catching as the note slipped from the tape and fluttered to the ground. Andrew arrived minutes later. One look at the scene, and his jaw tightened. "Call the police," he said calmly, though Harper could see the storm in his eyes. The officers arrived, took statements, and collected the note. But as before, there were no fingerprints, no witnesses, and no cameras facing the front lot. "This is intimidation," one officer said. "Document everything. We'll increase patrols." But increased patrols couldn't erase the tension that now hung over the shelter like fog. Natalie arrived with volunteers not long after. One of them gasped when they saw the window. "Who would do this?" someone whispered. Harper didn't answer. She didn't need to. They all knew. As the team swept up the glass and boarded the window, Harper moved through her tasks in silence. Feeding, cleaning, comforting. But the warmth in her chest had dulled. There was a tightness there now, not fear exactly, but vigilance. That night, she double-checked the locks on her apartment door. Tucker slept closer than usual. She kept her phone on the nightstand, volume turned up. The next day, it got worse. Red spray paint, splashed across the shelter's brick wall. Shut this place down or else. Andrew stood beside her as they looked at the message, hearts heavy, expressions grim. Do we report it? Harper asked. Of course, he said, but more importantly, we clean it, and we keep going. And they did. The whole team joined in. Buckets, scrub brushes, paint rollers. By the time the shelter opened that morning, the wall was clean again. But the scars remained. Harper knew Grady wouldn't stop at bricks and paint. He wanted them afraid. He wanted her to back off. But the opposite was happening. The vandalism sparked a wave of support. The community rallied behind Evergreen. People showed up with paint, with plywood, with extra locks. A local security company donated new cameras for the exterior. Someone even paid for a reinforced glass replacement for the shattered window. Dana, the journalist, ran a follow-up article, Shelter Targeted After Exposing Abuse, but they refused to back down. Still, Harper couldn't relax. Every time she walked home, she checked over her shoulder. Every time her phone buzzed, her chest tightened. One evening, she arrived home to find a note taped to her apartment door. Just 5 words, scribbled in thick black marker. This isn't over, Harper. That night, she didn't sleep at all. The next morning, she showed the note to Andrew. We need to consider filing a restraining order, he said. Harper shook her head. He hasn't shown up in person, and I'm not sure what we'd even say. He's careful. Too careful. But he's watching, Andrew said, his voice sharper now. And that makes this personal. Harper looked out the office window toward the kennels. Dogs were playing in the sunlight, tails wagging, tongues lolling happily. They don't know any of this is happening, she said quietly. No, Andrew agreed. And that's why we can't stop. Because they're depending on us to keep their world safe. Later that day, Harper took a moment alone in the play yard. Tucker lay beside her in the grass, eyes half closed in the warmth. Her mind swirled. What if the threats escalated again? What if someone got hurt? What if she had made it worse? But just then, a young girl arrived with her mother. They had come to meet Scout, who was up for adoption again now that Andrew's daughter was away for school. The moment the girl saw Scout, her face lit up. The golden retriever wagged his tail and trotted over, nuzzling into her arms like he already knew. Harper stood silently, watching from a distance, watching the connection spark, watching a new beginning unfold right in front of her. And in that moment, she remembered why. Why she had started this in the first place. Not for justice, not for revenge, for them, the ones who couldn't speak for themselves, the ones who waited behind gates and fences, hoping someone would see them, choose them, save them. Tucker let out a soft huff beside her, resting his head on her lap. She ran her fingers through his fur and whispered, "We're not going anywhere." Because threats could be washed away, windows could be replaced, but a life saved? That was permanent, and she was just getting started. The days following the vandalism were filled with tension, but also something Harper hadn't expected, gratitude. It started with a letter, handwritten on lined paper, taped gently to the shelter's front door one morning. "My daughter adopted her first dog here last year. You made her feel brave. We're behind you. Thank you for standing up for what's right." No signature, just a quiet message left in the early hours. Harper stared at it for a long moment before peeling it down and pinning it to the bulletin board in the office. Later that same day, a florist from across town arrived with an entire van full of donated pet-safe plants and flowers. "These are for the adoption yard," she said. "People need to see that good things still grow here." Then came the phone calls, one after another. "Can I donate food? Do you need help repainting the walls? My son wants to volunteer. He's 16. Is that old enough?" The inbox filled too. Support from nearby shelters, kind words from people Harper had never met, and one message that stopped her in her tracks. It was from a couple who had adopted a beagle mix 6 months ago. The subject line read, "We didn't know how much you mattered, until now." The email was simple, just a few lines. "Our dog saved our lives. We adopted him after a miscarriage nearly broke us. The way he loves, healed something in both of us. You gave us that chance. Please don't stop what you're doing." Harper wiped her eyes and forwarded the message to Andrew with one line, "We're making waves." At the shelter, the mood began to shift. Where there had been anxiety and tension, there was now a quiet sense of pride. The broken window had been replaced with reinforced glass. The graffiti was long gone. A new banner hung on the fence, "Every life matters here. Thank you for standing with us." Even the staff moved with a stronger sense of purpose. Natalie smiled more. The volunteers laughed louder. And Harper, she no longer kept looking over her shoulder. Because now, when she turned around, she saw people. People standing beside her. And then something happened that changed everything. A group of teenagers from the local high school showed up after school, uninvited, but prepared. They brought paint, brushes, and sketches. "We want to make a mural," their leader said. "Something bold. Something that says this place is here to stay." Harper was speechless. Andrew stepped in, smiling. "Let's see what you've got." Within 2 days, the wall that had once been defaced was transformed. On one side, a hand reaching down toward a frightened dog behind a fence. On the other, the same dog, now free, tail wagging, surrounded by people and sunshine. Above it all were the words, "Kindness is louder." The mural caught attention, fast. Local reporters stopped by to cover the story. Community fights back against shelter threats with art, support, and love. Photos were shared. Posts went viral. Harper's face showed up in several interviews. She was asked again and again how she stayed so calm through it all. Her answer never changed. "I didn't do this alone." One Saturday afternoon, while organizing supplies, Harper heard a knock at the back entrance. She opened the door to find an older man standing there with his cap in hand. "You probably don't remember me," he said, "but I used to come to the diner. You always knew how I liked my tea." Harper blinked, surprised. "Mr. Latham?" He chuckled. "That's right. When I saw your name in the paper, I told my wife, that girl always had heart." Then he handed her an envelope. Inside, a check, £500. "To help keep the lights on," he said. "You fed this town for years. Time we fed you back." The next few weeks passed in a blur of goodness. Donations kept coming in, blankets, toys, food, cash. Adoption rates spiked, and more people than ever came to volunteer. But the biggest surprise came from the city council. After seeing the coverage and community involvement, they reached out to Andrew and Harper directly. "We want to support you officially," the councilwoman said. "Better funding, monthly support. You've shown what this place means to our people." Andrew sat back in his chair, stunned. Harper couldn't stop smiling. From a brick through the window to city-level support in under a month, it felt surreal. But it was real. Because sometimes, when you stand for something long enough, people start standing with you. That evening, Harper stood outside the mural with Tucker by her side. Kids passed by on bikes. A mother and daughter stopped to take a photo. One volunteer added a final touch, painting a tiny heart on the dog's collar. Harper looked down at Tucker. "We didn't just survive this," she whispered. "We turned it into something." He wagged his tail as if agreeing. Behind her, Andrew stepped out with 2 mugs of hot tea. "One for the rebel," he said, handing her a mug, "and one for the guy who couldn't stop her." They clinked cups and sat on the bench beneath the mural. "You ever think back to that first day?" Harper asked. "All the time," Andrew replied. "I remember thinking you were brave, but I didn't know you were unstoppable." Harper chuckled. "Neither did I." They sipped their tea in silence, watching the sunset bathe the shelter in gold. This wasn't the end of the fight. Not yet, but it was a reminder. They'll rise beside you, and they'll carry the weight with you, one paw print at a time. The mural was barely a week old when the first Rail warning came. It was a chilly Wednesday morning. The sun hadn't yet broken through the clouds when Harper arrived at the shelter early to prep for the day. She approached the gate, sipping her tea and humming under her breath, until she stopped cold. The front door was wide open. The police arrived quickly. This time, the cameras had caught something. A figure in a hoodie, face obscured, entering just after 3 a.m, breaking the lock, spray painting the wall, wrecking supplies. The footage wasn't crystal clear, but Harper knew who it was. Grady had made his move. Later that afternoon, an officer pulled Harper aside. "We're filing a formal report, but unless we catch him in the act, it's hard to make charges stick. He's careful. We'll increase patrols, but be vigilant. And if you see him, don't approach. Call us." Harper nodded, her jaw tight. She wasn't afraid. Not exactly. She was angry. Her stomach dropped. Harper set her mug down and slowly stepped inside. Everything looked normal. The reception desk was untouched. No shattered glass. No alarms. But something felt off. She walked toward the storage room, heart pounding, and found it trashed. Shelves knocked over. Food bags slashed open. A container of dog medication spilled across the floor like broken glass. And on the wall, written in thick red spray paint, "Told you this wasn't over." She staggered back, breathing hard. Footsteps approached behind her. Andrew. He froze when he saw the wall. "Harper," he said, voice low, "go check the kennels. I'll call the police." She nodded, already sprinting. One by one, she counted heads. Scout, safe. Tucker, safe. Mocha, safe. They were all there, shaken, but unharmed. But the message was clear. Grady wasn't done. That night, Harper didn't go straight home. She walked the long way, past the diner. It was quiet, closed early, but in the alley behind it, the same dumpster stood, same cracked pavement, and leaning against the back door. Grady. He lit a cigarette and looked up. Well, he said, exhaling smoke. "Thought I'd see you creeping around again." Harper stood her ground. "You broke into a rescue shelter." He shrugged. "That mural was cute. Thought I'd make a little art of my own. You're not going to scare me." He chuckled, stepping closer. "You really think this is about fear?" "No, sweetheart. This is about reminding people what happens when they cross lines." She clenched her fists. "You're hurting animals. Innocent lives. And everyone knows it now." "Everyone?" His voice dropped. "You think some viral post and a paintbrush makes you invincible?" "You've already lost," Harper said. "People are watching now. You're exposed." Grady tossed the cigarette to the ground and crushed it under his boot. His eyes burned. "Then you better watch your back." With that, he disappeared into the shadows behind the alley. Harper stood there a moment longer, adrenaline pulsing. Then she turned and walked away. But now she knew, he was unhinged, cornered, dangerous, and desperate men did stupid things. The next day, Harper didn't just clean up the storage room. She turned it into a command center. She added extra locks, installed new internal cameras, reorganized the inventory, secured the dog medication, created a backup drive for all shelter records. And she sent one more message to Dana, the journalist. "He's escalated. We need another article. People should know." Dana replied almost instantly, "I'm on it." And Harper, "Be careful." That weekend, a small group of protesters appeared outside the diner. Signs read, "Justice for the Strays," "Support Evergreen," "Shut down Cruelty." Photos of the vandalized shelter had gone viral again. People were angry now, and they weren't just commenting from the sidelines. They were showing up. Grady didn't come out, but someone inside posted a sign in the diner window, "Lie-spreading waitress turned stray hoarder. Don't believe everything you read." Harper saw the photo online, and she smiled, because if he had to defend himself now, it meant she was winning. But that night, the scariest message arrived yet. She returned to her apartment to find her mailbox open. Inside was a single envelope. No stamp, no address, just one printed photo. Tucker, sitting in the shelter yard, with a red X drawn across it. No note, no words, just the message, "We're watching." Harper stared at the image, her hand trembling. She turned, scanning the street. A black car turned the corner and vanished. She rushed inside, locked the door, pulled Tucker close, and called Andrew. When he answered, she didn't wait. "He's threatened Tucker. I'm done playing safe. We go public." Again, there was a pause. "Then we go loud," Andrew said. "It's time to end this." The next morning, Harper held a press conference in front of the shelter gates. Local news cameras, community leaders, volunteers, pet owners, neighbors. She stood with Tucker by her side and a microphone in her hand. "My name is Harper. I was fired for feeding a hungry dog outside a diner. Since then, I've seen what happens when someone chooses silence over compassion. And I've seen what happens when one voice becomes many." She held up the photo with the red X. "This is how far some people will go to silence truth. But this place, these animals, they are not voiceless. We are their voice." The crowd erupted, and Harper knew it had officially become bigger than her. Grady could spray paint threats, but the city had chosen her side, and she wasn't stepping back. Not now, not ever. The wind howled through the trees as Harper and Andrew pulled off the dirt road. It was dusk, the kind of quiet where every branch creak and leaf crunch feels like a warning. The shelter's security team had traced the background of a threatening email to an old property just outside city limits. A name popped up. Grady. Not his diner, not his home. A forgotten building listed under an old LLC, one the city had stopped checking years ago. "Here," Andrew said, cutting the engine. "This is where he's hiding them." Harper stared at the worn chain-link fence surrounding the lot. The gate hung lopsided. Beyond it, rows of low, rusted cages under tarps, some barely standing. No signs, no noise. Not yet. Tucker, sitting in the back seat, growled low. "Let's be smart," Andrew said. "If we see something, we document it. Call the police. We don't confront unless we have to." Harper nodded, gripping her phone. But in her chest, her heart was already pounding a war drum. They stepped through the fence. The smell hit them first, damp fur, rot, and something sharper beneath it. Harper covered her mouth. Then the sound. A soft, broken whimper. They moved quickly, stepping between the cages. Most were empty, old bedding, rusted bowls, dried stains. But then, behind a crooked shed, they found them. 4 dogs, thin, muzzled, paws raw from pacing. One lay limp, barely lifting its head. Harper's breath caught. She dropped to her knees by the gate. Hey, it's okay." Andrew pulled out his phone, taking photos, recording everything. "We need to call this in. Now." Suddenly, a click. A sound Harper had heard only once before. She turned. Grady stood behind them, holding a metal crowbar loosely in one hand. "Well," he said, "if it isn't the stray queen and her fan club." Andrew stepped forward, protective. "Back off, Grady. We've got everything on camera. This place is going down." Grady laughed coldly. "You really think some grainy footage and bleeding hearts are going to shut me down?" He took a step closer. "You don't get it, do you?" he said. "People like me, we don't lose. We outlast. We rebuild. We scare enough people into silence, and eventually, you forget." Harper rose slowly, moving in front of the cages. "I didn't forget," she said. "You should have kept waiting tables." "No," she said, voice steady. "I should have done this sooner." Grady's jaw clenched. "You've ruined everything." "No," Harper replied. "You did that yourself." Suddenly, flashing lights exploded across the field. Sirens. Police vehicles screeched to a halt beyond the fence. Officers poured in through the gate, shouting commands. Grady turned, startled, before dropping the crowbar and raising his hands. "I didn't do anything," he yelled. "They're trespassing." But the cameras were still rolling, and this time, the world was watching. Later that night, Harper stood by the cages as the rescue teams worked. Vets assessed the animals. Volunteers set up emergency transport. News vans lined the road outside. Grady was in handcuffs. And Harper? She was exactly where she needed to be. She looked down at one of the rescued dogs, a small mutt with shaking legs and swollen paws. "You're safe now," she whispered. Tucker leaned beside her, silent and steady. Andrew walked over, placing a blanket in her arms. "We did it," he said softly. "No," Harper replied. "They did it. Every animal. Every voice that couldn't be heard." She looked around, the floodlights casting long shadows as people worked to undo the damage Grady had caused. "I just listened." By sunrise, the last dog was loaded into a van bound for Evergreen. The shelter had prepared extra space, foster homes were lined up, and donations had surged since the raid went public. Harper rode in the back with the smallest of the rescued pups curled against her chest. She didn't cry. Not this time, because the fight was finally over. Not perfect, not without scars, but over. And from the rubble of cruelty, something better had grown. A voice, a movement, a purpose. And it had a name now, Harper. The days following the raid moved in slow motion. Harper barely had time to process what happened. One minute she was standing in a field surrounded by rescue teams and news crews. The next, she was knee-deep in intake forms, vet reports, and emergency foster placements. But even through the exhaustion, one thing was clear. They had won. Grady had been arrested. The illegal kennels were shut down, and dozens of animals had been pulled from the shadows and into the safety of Evergreen's care. Still, Harper knew the work was far from over. The rescued dogs needed time. Their bodies were healing, but their trust was fragile. They flinched at loud sounds, hid in corners, refused food unless coaxed with a whisper. And Harper? She made it her mission to visit every single one of them. Every morning, she'd walk the recovery wing, speaking softly, crouching low, offering treats or a quiet presence. It wasn't about fixing them. It was about letting them know they were safe now. One of the smallest pups, a white terrier with cloudy eyes and a scarred paw, had refused to come out of his crate for 3 days. But on the 4th morning, Harper found him sitting at the front, waiting for her. She didn't say anything. She just smiled, sat down, and stayed with him until he finally laid his head in her lap. That was how healing began. The shelter was changing too. The community, inspired by Harper's bravery, had rallied around Evergreen. Donations poured in, not just money, but volunteers, supplies, and offers to adopt. One local contractor donated materials to expand the facility. A retired vet came out of retirement to offer weekend services. Even city officials who had once ignored the shelter were now discussing permanent funding and legislative reform. And Harper? She didn't just become part of the shelter. She became the face of it. People came just to meet the girl who stood up. She was interviewed on local TV, invited to speak at town hall meetings, asked to consult on welfare reforms, but she never let it distract her. Every time someone asked for a quote or an article, she pointed them back to the dogs. "This isn't about me," she'd say. "It's about the lives we forgot, the ones that didn't have a voice until we listened." One evening, after a long shift, Harper sat in the quiet of the new recovery yard with Tucker and Scout resting at her feet. The stars blinked overhead, and a soft breeze carried the faint scent of pine from the nearby woods. Andrew joined her with 2 cups of tea. "You've done something incredible," he said, handing her a mug. "We all did," she replied. "No," he said, "you started it. You fed one dog. You didn't walk past. You didn't say, 'Not my problem.' And now? Look around." She did. The expanded shelter, the filled adoption boards, The sound of laughter in the distance as volunteers prepped for the next day. Feels like we're building something new, Harper said. We are, Andrew nodded. Not just a shelter, a legacy. She looked at him, surprised. I spoke to the board, he said. They want to make it official. They want to name the new wing after you. Harper blinked. What? The Harper wing, he said with a grin. For rehabilitation and recovery. For every dog that needs time. Just like the ones you stayed with, day after day. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then, only if we put Scout's paw print on the plaque. Andrew laughed. Done. Later that night, as she walked home with Tucker beside her, Harper passed the old diner. It was boarded up now, closed indefinitely. She paused for a moment. No bitterness, no anger, just reflection. That building used to define her limits, how much she could take, how small she had to feel, how quiet she had to stay. Now, it was just a building, nothing more. She reached into her bag and pulled out her old name tag, the one from her very first day as a waitress. She placed it gently on the diner step, and walked away, because the past had served its purpose, and her future had already begun. The courtroom smelled of wood polish and cold air. Harper sat in the front row beside Andrew, her hands folded tightly in her lap, a plain blue folder resting on her knees. Inside were the photos, the reports, the footage, the testimonies, everything they had spent months collecting. Grady sat across the room, jaw tight, wearing a suit that didn't suit him. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something. He didn't look at Harper. He hadn't since the arrest. Maybe because he already knew he'd lost. But this wasn't just about winning. It was about making it count. The case had made headlines. Not just locally, regionally. It was being called a landmark animal welfare trial, the first in years where community reporting, shelter advocacy, and citizen evidence had come together to expose an underground kennel. Reporters filled the gallery. The courtroom sketch artist was already flipping through pages of her notepad. A documentary crew had even requested permission to cover the proceedings. Harper had declined interviews. She only had one story to tell, and she'd tell it from the stand. The trial began with details, veterinarian reports, shelter logs, video clips from the illegal kennel, witnesses from surrounding properties. Each one painted the same picture: neglect, cruelty, silence. Harper listened quietly, her heart heavy but resolute. The words were painful, the photos worse, but they needed to be seen, they needed to be felt, because that was how change started, not in headlines, but in discomfort. Then the judge called her name. She stood, walked slowly to the front, placed her hand on the Bible, took her oath, then sat down in the witness chair. Without consent? I filmed someone chasing away animals with a broom. Couldn't that be exaggerated? A reaction taken out of context? Harper held her ground. The courtroom hushed. The prosecutor approached. Miss Harper, when did you first realize something was wrong? Harper took a breath. The morning I fed a hungry dog outside my diner. He wasn't barking. He wasn't begging. He was just waiting, hoping. And what happened after that? I lost my job. There was a ripple in the room, surprise, disbelief. But that dog led me to Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation, and eventually, to Grady's illegal kennel. She opened the folder and passed it to the bailiff. These are the photos I took, the ones we found when we arrived. The dogs, the cages, the injuries. The bailiff handed the folder to the judge, who flipped through it with a furrowed brow. And why did you get involved? Harper looked at Grady for the first time. Because silence protects the wrong side. The cross-examination came next. Grady's lawyer was slick, polite on the surface, sharp beneath. You admit you were fired, correct? Yes. You were emotional? I was human. You recorded Grady multiple times. Context doesn't bruise a dog's ribs. The lawyer backed off. She had said enough. Outside the courthouse, The crowd was larger than before. People with signs, adopted dogs, children holding posters of the mural. Andrew stepped beside her. "You shook the room in there." "I wasn't trying to shake anything," she said. "I just wanted them to see." "They saw," he said. Grady's sentencing came a week later. Guilty. Convicted on multiple counts of animal cruelty, operating an unlicensed facility, and obstruction. 18 months in prison. A permanent ban from owning or operating any animal business. Fines to fund local shelters. It wasn't as long as Harper had hoped, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings mattered more than endings. The momentum didn't stop. The city passed a new animal protection ordinance. Harper was invited to join the advisory board for state-level legislation. Evergreen received a grant to create a new investigative outreach program to track and report animal mistreatment early. They called it the Scout Initiative, in honor of the dog who started it all. At the shelter, things were changing too. The new Harper wing opened in spring. The ribbon cutting was small, staff, a few friends, and one golden retriever in a bow tie. Harper gave a short speech. "This place isn't about me. It's about second chances. For animals, for people, for truth. May this space always stand for all three." Tucker barked once. Scout wagged his tail. And in the crowd, a child hugged her new puppy, one of the rescues from Grady's old property, and whispered, "You're safe now." Later that night, Harper sat with Andrew outside the shelter, their feet resting on the porch rail, tea in hand. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. "All the time," she said, "but I try not to look too far. What we've built here, it's already enough." He nodded. But even then, they both knew, Harper's story wasn't ending. It was evolving. And tomorrow? It would bark. It would run. It would wag its tail and change someone's life. The wind was soft that morning. It carried the scent of spring, the hum of distant traffic, and the promise of something quiet, something ending, and beginning all at once. Harper stood in front of the diner, the one where everything had started. It looked different now. Boarded windows, a faded "for lease" sign. The walls no longer held the power they once did. The place that had broken her, that had dismissed her for a single act of kindness, now stood silent. Harper smiled, just faintly. She wasn't there out of anger. She was there to let go. She stepped forward and placed a small paper on the door. A printed photo. Scout, in the shelter yard. Happy, healthy, free. Below it, in her handwriting, "One act of kindness is never small." She didn't linger. She turned and walked away, Scout on one side, Tucker on the other. The past, behind her. The present, beside her. The future, waiting. Back at Evergreen, the shelter was alive with movement. The Harper wing was thriving. The Scout initiative had grown. A new group of volunteers were in training, learning how to spot early signs of abuse, how to comfort scared dogs, how to rebuild trust without rushing it. Harper moved through the shelter with calm confidence. She knew the schedule, the names, the needs, but she also knew when to pause, when to kneel down, when to whisper, "You're safe now," because she remembered what it felt like to be on the other side of a locked door, hoping someone would see her. Now, she was the one unlocking it for others. One afternoon, a young girl arrived with her mum. She was quiet, maybe 10 years old, clutching a backpack and glancing nervously around. Harper knelt to greet her. "First time here?" she asked gently. The girl nodded. "My name's Harper. Want to meet someone special?" The girl hesitated. Then, "Okay." Harper led her to the corner yard, where one of the rescued pups, a black and white mix named Lily, sat with ears perked and eyes wide. "She's new here too," Harper said. "Still learning people are good." The girl crouched slowly. Lily stepped forward, one paw at a time. And in that moment, as hand met fur, Harper saw something she'd seen only a few times before. A beginning. A soft, quiet, powerful beginning. That evening, Harper sat on the shelter's back steps with Andrew, watching the sunset melt into soft purples and golds. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" She looked out over the play yard, where Scout was napping in the grass and Tucker sniffed around the fence like he owned the place. "About how everything comes back around. About how I used to think getting fired was the worst thing that had ever happened to me." Andrew raised a brow. "And now?" She smiled. "Now I think it was the best. Because from that one moment of loss came everything. The dogs, the shelter, the change, the purpose." Later that night, as she turned out the shelter lights and stepped into the quiet, Harper glanced back one last time. The building stood warm and strong. The mural on the wall, "Kindness is louder," glowed faintly in the moonlight. She could hear soft barks and the rustle of straw beds. Nothing frantic, nothing fearful, just life, safe, loved, free. She walked home with Tucker close and Scout just ahead, tail wagging like he was leading the way. And maybe he was. Maybe he always had been. Because one act of kindness, one plate of food, one soft word, one moment of courage, had rippled through 100 lives, and in doing so, had saved her own. Moved by Harper's journey? Then let's keep kindness going. Like, share, and subscribe to help more voices be heard, more lives be saved, and more hearts be healed. Every story we tell is a reminder. Kindness is louder.